Welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Becky Robinson. She's an entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of a company called Weaving Influence, which is an online influence building company. They work with authors and thought leaders, shocking, right? And help them to show up online in some powerful ways that show up in real life. So there's much more to her bio than that, but I want to sort of keep it brief so we can get into the good stuff. So welcome aboard, Becky. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
Cool. So we work with pretty much similar folks, right? So you're working with authors and thought leaders. We're working with authors and thought leaders. And I have envy as I look on the screen here and see all your books stacked all over and the titles and all that. But why don't we start with briefly what it is you do for them? And then I want to get into a couple other questions I've got.
Sure, no problem. So Peter, we are a full service digital marketing agency. So if you think about any type of marketing tactic that you could leverage online, we not only create strategy around it, we also implement and execute on behalf of our clients. So when I founded the company, Peter, my original vision was that authors might need some creative, strategic ideas on how to market their business books.
Yep.
And so I thought I would merely serve as a consultant and get on the phone with folks and spitball ideas and give them a great plan to market their books. And what I very quickly found out is that most authors don't have the time and energy to devote to the multiple tasks that are involved in orchestrating an effective book launch. And so we began adding services to support authors. And so we do everything from web design and development to social media implementation, to email marketing support, content marketing support, and we also pitch media and land placements for our clients in business publications and podcasts. So
very cool. Good stuff. All critical and necessary things today. So let's talk about, now when did you start the company?
2012, Peter.
Okay,
so we just passed the 8-year mark. Yes.
Okay. So you're an 8-year-old, your teeth are about to fall out, is it?
Oh my, yes.
So let's talk about even the difference between launching a book in 2012 and launching a book today. And I want to sort of set that up with, all too often, authors and speakers and thought leaders, they get overly obsessed with the book. And listen, the book is critically important. They put their heart and soul, their blood, sweat, and tears into it. But the book can't be the tail that wags the dog, in my humble opinion. And it's not, the book is really representative of, in some instances, the launch of a business or a new way of thinking, but nobody is in the quote book business, right? Where the authors are just making a living from that. So tell me sort of what you've seen change in the last 8 years or so.
Sure. Well, let me first address what you said, Peter, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. I don't think there's any thought leader out there who's going to make a living based on book sales alone. So anytime we partner with an author, we really want to be able to figure out, what are the bigger picture goals that are fueling their desire to bring a book into the world? Or another way that I put it is, what's the job that this author wants the book to do for them. And in many cases, authors are acutely aware of the fact that their book is, almost like a cheap, business card that gives them immediate credibility to fuel their other services.
Sure.
But there are some cases where we encounter folks, and really what they want more than anything else is just to get the message of the book out into the world. So it's really important when we start to partner with an author to identify what those bigger picture goals are, and to be sure that any tactics that we recommend really map to helping them achieve those goals. And especially when it comes to folks making a really big investment in book marketing, there has to be a way to tie the return on investment that they're going to get by investing in marketing their book.
Well, so actually, before you even go back to the 2012 question,
sure.
I think you brought up a key point there, is goals, right? So it seems like glaringly obvious, but I can't tell you, and I'm sure you've had similar situations, the conversations I've had to have with clients on the front end of, okay, why are we writing this book? And if it's a year from now when we achieve all our objectives, what does that look like? What does that look like financially? What does that look like in terms of entree into places you haven't been, credibility, like whatever those are? And a lot of times they sort of cock an eyebrow and say, I'm writing a book, like unicorns and rainbows magic will happen, and whatever. But I think that goal piece is absolutely critical and essential. And too many people just sort of, and just sort of dive over it.
Well, you know why I think that is, Peter? I think it's because so many of us are so enmeshed in our dreams. And
Yes.
writing a book in some cases is such an emotional milestone for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it represents to them some level of success that they just have a difficult time unraveling that from their other business priorities in the world. So,
Yeah.
being able to help people really look at, what is success with the book. For some authors, honestly, Peter, what I've found is the fact that the book has been published and is available is the success that they've been looking for. It was a major milestone that they
Yeah.
wanted to
Yeah.
achieve, and seeing the book either, on a physical shelf, which is becoming increasingly
Difficult.
diminished,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
difficult, or whether it's just holding that book in their hands, there's this, emotional milestone that people are reaching. And while it's wonderful to acknowledge that, it doesn't necessarily add up then to spend 10, 20, $30,000 marketing the book
Yeah.
if the whole deal was just to finish the book.
And there's
And
nothing wrong with that, by the way. If you say, because I was talking to somebody the other day, and one of the primary reasons that person continues to write books is it's a forcing mechanism to get them to think clearly. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome, but it doesn't need to be an overly expensive forcing mechanism to get your thoughts together, where you're going to spend, a ton of money on the back end to do silly things that don't net a benefit.
yeah, I think one of the most refreshing things I see is when authors are very realistic about that. And,
Mm-hmm.
we worked with an author a couple of years ago, and he very much was an author who was in the place of, hey, I have these thoughts that I've developed over my career. The clients
Mm-hmm.
that I've been coaching would love to be able to read the things I've
Mm-hmm.
learned. And he said to me, I don't want marketing, hey, help me produce my book, which, by the way, we do that too. So, we designed a beautiful cover, we
Yep.
designed a
Yep.
beautiful interior, we helped with editing, and that author achieved what he wanted because he had this asset
Yeah.
to share with his
Yep.
clients.
Yep.
Done. And he's happy and I'm happy. So, like you said, it's perfectly okay to have a goal to get your thoughts out into the world. It doesn't have to be something that requires so much additional investment. And if
Yep.
authors can get clear about that ultimate outcome that they want to achieve, then we can support them a lot more effectively.
And calibrate the investments accordingly, right? So if the goal is to get it out, great. If the goal is to get it out, but you're launching a business, then it warrants significant investment if there's an ROI on that. So let's go back to sort of the history question there. So talk about what you've seen evolve, change, new tips and tricks and tactics and strategies, et cetera, that's different today, launching a book now versus only 8 years ago, which is not that long ago. Although,
Sure. Well, I think, one of the things that we've seen, Peter, is maybe focusing and clarifying as it relates to the use of social media. So back in 2012, if you had asked me for my advice, I would have encouraged you to grow a Twitter account, to put
mhm.
content on your Twitter account regularly. I would have encouraged you really to try to do all the things related to social media. And as time has gone on, we've gotten a lot more clear about the fact that not every author needs to use every social channel, and really
Correct. Mhm.
selecting and focusing energy and attention on one channel where your target audience is most likely to be reached. So while Twitter is still a valuable marketing tool to many people, particularly those who built traction on Twitter
Mhm.
as early adopters, most times now we don't recommend Twitter as a channel for folks who haven't started there yet. So
So that's interesting. I want to push on that. So if they haven't started yet, I'm assuming that means they're marginally active. They've got a handful of followers, et cetera. So if they have to start from kind of ground zero, build a followership, push the content out, you're saying that that mountain's too steep to climb right now for most of your clients.
yes, that's
Okay.
correct. And
But,
but, for
if,
someone like me, I have
yeah,
30 plus thousand
yeah,
Twitter followers. We still leverage my channel on our author's behalf. So that's
got it.
another kind of interesting consideration for authors. There are times where authors have not necessarily done the work to build their own platform. And in many cases, they may be hindered by reaching audiences for their book because
Yep,
they haven't shown up online. And it's not going to work for anyone to be on the path to publish a business book and to
yep.
say, okay, well, I have to build this all at once. It's not going to work. So, in most cases, it's like that old proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The
Yeah.
second best time is today. For authors, it's better to find someone else who has a tree and climb it than it is to try to plant your tree now when the book's coming out and there's not really enough
So
time for
I
it to
want to
grow.
unpack a couple of the things there, right? So most people think about these things too late. right? So I'm in book mode, meaning they finished writing the book, which might have been 6 months, 6 years of their life, right? Then they get into, oh, geez, I guess it has to be marketed. So they work with folks like you, they work with folks like me, others, whatever. And that's when they start to think about those things. The reality is the time to build a platform, like you said, it's always important to build a platform. You can always get great content down there. And it's a little bit of the build it before you need it, right?
It absolutely, it's completely build it before you need it. And it's also offer value to others before you need to ask for their help.
Yeah, don't be that guy that's always calling and saying, can I borrow the screwdriver? Don't be that guy, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. So, I said this on my podcast recently. I have not yet published a book in the world in terms of like a print book, like you
Yep.
think of a traditional book. But I believe from the day that I joined Facebook in 2009 until today, I have been building the platform that
Sure.
if I ever get to that emotional and closely held dream of publishing a book and holding it in my hands, I've been doing that work all along. So every day when you start to show up online
Yep.
and you have value to
Yep.
offer to people and you share your expertise or you're generous about sharing your network, it's like you're banking up this possibility down the line that people want to hear what they say. They want to read what you write and they want to help when you ask for it.
So I want to touch on another great point I think that you made, which is, okay, so let's say you didn't do that. Let's say you didn't plan and whatever. It is what it is, right? You're not going to pause the publication of a book and say, I'll come back in 5 years. I'm going to spend all my time building my social media. That's not going to happen, right? So
It's
I think
not
the
going to
point that you
happen.
made, yeah, nobody's going to do that, right? But the point that you made is you could borrow, if you will, the followers of others if you do it in a respectful and thoughtful way. So if one of the things that I find really, really cool about this whole space is the amount of collaboration that goes on behind the scenes, right? So in most industries, if you're Coke and I'm Pepsi, we're, whatever. But I think a lot of authors and thought leaders say, wait, we're in this space, and it's like, somebody could buy your book and my book, right? It's not a win-lose, piece. So therefore, if you're writing about a subject that's interesting to me, let's be buds, and let's share things, and let's, now we might compete over a specific engagement with a client at some point in time, but whatever. But we could collaborate and compete and not be sort of gladiator competitors. And what that means is if you could recruit, friends that are authors and thought leaders and speakers, I find this to be one of the cheapest, most cost-effective ways to get some traction on a book is get the testimonials of people that have a bigger following than you, right? And then when the time comes, you have to do all the work and the heavy lifting in terms of creating the assets. Ask them to help you. I mean, and be deliberate and specific and say, not only do I want you to help me, but the week of, whatever, June the 17th, I'm launching this thing. And these are the 3 things I really, really, really like you to do to get it out there, because they've already built their following. The propensity of their followers to buy your book is exponentially higher than the general public.
Certainly so. And, being focused to know what to ask and who to ask for it is helpful. And again, going back to that whole idea of, being generous first, offering to see where you can add value to others before you need to ask for anything.
Yep. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So I want to talk for a moment about realistic expectations. And I'll give you just a real life example of I won't give names, but of a real client I was talking to this morning. They did a book launch 6 months ago. So they're on their post-launch phase and now sort of surveying the landscape and figuring out what to do. And we're getting ready to do some work. And I said, get me your book scan numbers, because it's just and it's not the end all be all for the work that we do, but I want to get a sense of, he's telling me how successful the book was and the kudos it got. And when you look online, you're like, wow, lots of people did lots of things. And the numbers were really, 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 really depressing, like barely over 1,000 units. And then I quickly did the math based on the investments I know this person made. And I'm like, oh my God, they've spent literally over $100 per unit sold, probably closer to 150 to get it out there. And it's just so sad to me, because, not every book needs to be judged by the same standards of A Good to Great or a Malcolm Gladwell. There are plenty of books that could be wildly successful if you got the right 1,000, 2,000 copies in the right hands of the right people that you're looking for. But I see that all too much where, like, people are throwing lots of money at things because it seems like the thing to do, and the groups that they're working with, have the right credentials. But then 6 months later, they're like in this postpartum depression.
Yeah, that's really challenging, Peter. And of course, any business book author who invests a lot of money in getting a book out and only sells 1,000 copies in 6 months would be disappointed. I mean,
Yep.
that is a lower number than what we would typically expect. For some authors, what I want to do with them is reframe the value of the book in the world. And one of the things that I've noticed, which is a bit counterintuitive, is the more books an author can give away,
Yep.
um, and get out into the world in some other means, the more opportunities that they can create with the work. So, back to the whole tree analogy, books are seeds. And
Yep.
as you
Yep.
sow that seed broadly, the returns that you might get can be more than you might expect. So the authors that we've worked with who have been the most successful in many cases are proactively thinking about that from the start and
Yep.
measuring
Yep.
success not in terms of how many books did I sell and how much did it cost to sell them, but how many books did I get out into the world and what possibilities could I create because the book was there.
Well, but let's talk about that short-term, long-term thing, because one of the data points I came across fairly recently, last couple of months, was that most business books, first of all, not only do they not sell a lot, but the newer trend, the last 2 years or so, is many are out having better sales year two than year one,
Mhm.
which is a little bit counterintuitive to the way sort of what I would call the book industrial complex reacts, right? Like they pour a ton of resources, get it out, move on to the next thing. But is that, have you seen that as well?
Well, I sure have. I spoke to an author yesterday, and again, not naming names, but this author has had multiple books in the leadership space. And he
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that he's partnering with a large publisher. The book is likely to be a New York Times bestseller. Now,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't support him during the launch, so I'm not claiming that
Yep.
success myself.
Yep.
But the book's likely to be a New York Times bestseller. But he's coming to me saying, okay, well, the book came out last week. My publisher is done supporting it, but I need to have a long-term view of how to use this book in my
Exactly.
business and how can you help? So, Peter, before we started recording, we were talking about marathons, and
Yes.
that is by far my favorite analogy. Book marketing is a marathon, not a sprint. And
Yep.
so when publishers say, okay, we're going to focus on this book for 1 week, in some ways they're sending a message to the author that that's also what the author needs to do. Like, okay, we launched, we're done. But really, in my mind, the launch is just the beginning. So the same way a wedding is the beginning of a marriage, it's an important
Yep.
signaling moment, it's an important
Sure.
milestone. I say to people, and by the way, this isn't my quote, it came from a publisher whose
Mm-hmm.
name I'm not remembering right now, but you have to be married to the message. So
Yeah.
the launch is
Yep.
the wedding, it's the first mile of the marathon, whatever analogy you want to use, and you need to be committed to that message over the long haul. So if you're going to invest, you have to believe in that book so deeply that over time you're going to find ways to use it as an asset to others, to incorporate it in your business, to keep it in the
Yep.
conversation,
Totally.
not in a way like you hammer and bug people, but in a way that you continue to share, all the content that's in the book
Yep.
so that you're drawing in the people who need to read the book. And
Well,
I think it's short-sighted to think a book is 6 months or a year. A book is, a decade.
no, and what I was going to say, I mean, the other way I help my clients sort of understand that is, okay, this is a capital investment. Let's amortize that over 5 to 7 years, decade, right? Because unless you're writing a book about, this year's Super Bowl or this year's elections or whatever, 99% of business books are, I don't want to say timeless, but whether I read that today or in 6 months or in 18 months should be equally valid. Again, there's some caveats there if you're writing about technology or social or whatever, but leadership, management, sales, you got to amortize that over 5 to 7 years. And I think two things happen. One is this misconception of a book as a seasonal item. We're showing short skirts this spring and long skirts in the fall or whatever the fashion analogy is. And a little bit of so that coupled with the ADD of the author, where, if the book came out today, that means they were thinking about it 3 years ago and they've got 10 other things in their head and they haven't done it justice yet by being that sort of servant authorship where they've got to continue, like you said, to be married to the message and be equally committed today, even though they may be bored with their own stuff because they're headed somewhere else in a new research. But I couldn't agree more with that.
Well, and there's no harm in thinking about the next book as you're
Right.
marketing the first one.
Right.
Quite often, what we see is when an author puts out a second book or a third book, it brings new attention to those older
Exactly.
titles. So there's no harm in it. I've had authors before ask me, how long should I wait in between my books?
Hmm.
And I have one author who puts out a book every single year. Now, there's a lot of value in that because he creates momentum where people are
Sure.
expecting. It's almost like a movie franchise, like, well, when's the next
Right.
one?
Right.
I'm waiting. But you do want to give time for each book to breathe and realize that the investment that you make in one can build on the other. It's compound interest
Yes,
because every
exactly.
book you're building your platform and people are waiting and interested if you're providing value to them.
Well, and I think there's also a bit of an expectation of when you put out a book, whether that's a year, which I would argue is probably too frequently, or 3 or 5 or whatever, you have to be adding to the conversation, right? So there are folks out there that have 30, 40 books to their name, and I would also argue it's sort of the same book regurgitated with 10% new filler, and that doesn't really add much to the conversation. I think people's most valuable resource today is their time. So when I look at why would I read a book or not, I don't care about the $20 for the book, but I'm looking at that going, okay, 5 hours of my life. I'm a busy person. I've got lots of things to do. What am I getting for this? Like, I have to enjoy it. I want to learn something. I want to be entertained. I want my expectations to be shaken up. And, there's not a lot of room for mediocrity anymore. Bad
That is
stuff.
true.
All
You
right.
have to start with a good book.
Exactly. It's glaringly obvious, but often overlooked. All right. As
Yeah.
we start to wrap up here, this is fun. We can go for days on this stuff because this is just fun. Any final words of wisdom, either framed as do nots or do's, like definitely don't do that, that's stupid, or definitely consider doing that? No pressure, but
Sure.
it could be make or break for folks. No pressure.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say to anyone who is thinking about making a difference through creating content that adds value to the world, going back to that idea of generosity first, thinking about your book as a seed, and then also building that network of connections before you need it. Those are the things that stand out to me the most about the authors that I've known who have had the most success in terms of reaching bigger picture goals for their businesses related to a book.
Awesome. And I think you'd be surprised at how approachable they are. you know,
Yes.
when you reach out with intent, not as a taker in the Adam Grant sense, but when you go reach out in an honorable way and tell someone you admire their work, that's flattering to anybody. So great.
It sure is.
Well, I appreciate your time. I appreciate all the good stuff that you're doing. And thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thanks, Peter. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
Thanks. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.